March 15th, 1943. 10:47 a.m. Haarlem, Netherlands. A 16-year-old girl pedals down Rodwestraat. Blonde braids, blue skirt, wicker basket on her bicycle. She stops in front of a cafe frequented by Wehrmacht officers. She walks in alone. Inside, a German Oberleutnant drinks beer. He's 34 years old. He's been away from home for 2 years. He's tired. He's lonely. He noticed the girl immediately. She smiles at him. She asks if he speaks Dutch. He does, a little. She laughs. She touches his arm. She asks him a question that will end his life in approximately 14 minutes. Would you like to go for a walk in the woods? He says, yes. They always say yes. Here's what you need to understand about that question. Between 1941 and 1945, the Dutch resistance documented 347 targeted assassinations against Nazi officers and collaborators. Male operatives carried out 302 of those missions. Female operatives carried out 45. The success rate tells you everything. Men succeeded 34% of the time. Women succeeded 87% of the time. That's not a small difference. That's not statistical noise. That's a 2.5x performance advantage in the deadliest profession imaginable. And if you're wondering whether dozens of Nazi soldiers really died at the hands of a 14-year-old girl with a bicycle, the answer is more complicated and more disturbing than the question suggests. The Netherlands Institute for War Documentation spent decades analyzing these operations. They identified a pattern. Male targets dropped their guard when approached by young women. They didn't just drop it. They voluntarily followed these women to isolated locations. They accepted invitations. They turned their backs. The Wehrmacht actually knew about this vulnerability. They published a counterintelligence manual in 1943. Section 4.7 specifically warned officers to beware of attractive female agents. Most German officers never read it. The ones who did read it didn't think it applied to them. 3 young Dutch women exploited this cognitive failure systematically. 2 sisters and a law student. Their names rarely appear in military history books. There are no statues of them. No medals were given until 69 years after the war ended. But in the archives of the Haarlem Resistance Council, there's a classified report from 1944. It states only this: Unit FTH 40. Confirmed eliminations. Method: non-threatening approach. Failure rate: 13%. Effentianien. Freddy Oberstegen. Truus Oberstegen. Anishaft. 2 of them lived into their 90s. One died at 24. 3 weeks before liberation, with a bullet in her head and one final sentence for her executioners. I shoot better than you. This isn't a story about heroism. This is an analysis of why teenagers with bicycles and .32 caliber pistols were more effective weapons than trained soldiers with submachine guns. And this is about the psychological cost of killing dozens of people before your 20th birthday. The Nazi occupation of the Netherlands began in May 1940. 5 days of military resistance. Then total surrender. What came after wasn't just military control. It was bureaucratic, systematic, lethal. Curfews were imposed. Lists of Jews were compiled. Deportations began. Every Dutch citizen had to make a choice: collaborate with the Nazis, resist them, or pretend nothing was happening and try to survive. The numbers tell the story. 90% of the Dutch population chose the third option: live as normally as possible under occupation. 5% actively collaborated with the enemy. 5% joined the resistance. Of that 5% who resisted, most distributed illegal pamphlets. They hid Jewish refugees. They sabotaged railway lines. An even smaller fraction took up arms against the occupiers. And within that fraction, a tiny group did something most resistors absolutely refused to do. They killed with their own hands. Not distant bombings where you never see the victims. Not group ambushes where responsibility is shared. Direct executions. Look someone in the eyes and pull the trigger. Freddy Oberstegen was 14 years old when she started doing this. Her older sister Truus was 16. Their mother Trijns raised them in a tiny apartment in Haarlem, a city about 12 miles west of Amsterdam. They slept on mattresses stuffed with straw. They owned almost nothing. but their mother still made room for strangers. Jewish refugees fleeing Germany, political fugitives running from Nazi persecution, people who desperately needed somewhere to hide. Trench hid them all. She was a communist. That meant something specific in 1930s Europe. It meant when you saw injustice, you didn't look away, you acted. She taught her daughters one principle above all others. If you need to help someone, you have to make sacrifices for yourself. When the occupation began, Freddie was still in middle school. Truus was in high school. They started their resistance work small, distributing anti-Nazi pamphlets at night, covering German propaganda posters with their own messages. The Netherlands must be free. Don't work in Germany. That second message was tactical. For every Dutch worker in a German factory, one more German soldier could be sent to the front lines. Resistance wasn't just about fighting. It was about understanding the mathematics of war. The girls would paste their messages over Nazi posters, then race away on their bicycles. Hearts pounding, knowing that if they were caught, they would be shot on sight. They were never caught. Two young girls on bicycles. Who would suspect them? In 1941, a man named Frans van der Wil came to their door. He commanded the Haarlem Resistance Council, part of the underground network fighting the Nazi occupation. He had heard about the Overstegen family, the mother who hid refugees, the daughters who distributed illegal pamphlets. He wanted to recruit them for something more serious. Van der Wil asked their mother directly, "Can your daughters join the resistance?" Not just distributing papers, real operations. Trench said yes. The girls said yes. They were 14 and 16 years old. What Van der Wil proposed next would define the rest of their lives. He told them they would learn to sabotage bridges and railway lines. They would gather intelligence on German troop movements, and they would learn to shoot Nazis. Truus looked at her younger sister. Freddie grinned and said something that reveals everything about who she was. "Well, that's something I've never done before." Their mother gave them one piece of advice before they left for training. Always stay human. Remember that, no matter what happens. Always stay human. The Overstegen sisters were taken to an underground potato shed. There, beneath the earth, they learned to fire a weapon. How to aim. How to stay calm under pressure. How to kill another human being. Their first mission wasn't assassination. It was arson. Nazi supply warehouses needed to burn, but they were heavily guarded by SS soldiers. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Freddie and Truus would approach the guards. Talk to them, flirt with them, distract them with smiles and conversation, while the rest of the resistance slipped in from behind and set the fires. It worked perfectly. The warehouses burned to the ground. The guards never suspected the two teenage girls who had been chatting with them minutes before the explosions. Van der Wil saw what they were capable of. These girls could go places men couldn't. They could get close to targets no one else could reach. Their youth, their gender, their apparent innocence. These were weapons more powerful than any gun. This is where the 87% success rate begins to make tactical sense. Male resistance fighters approaching a German officer triggered immediate suspicion. The officer's training kicked in. Scan for weapons. Check for backup. Maintain defensive posture. But a young woman approaching an officer in a bar, smiling, asking if he'd like to take a walk. The officer's brain processed this as an opportunity, not a threat. His survival instincts were overridden by something more primitive. By the time those instincts kicked back in, it was already too late. A 1942 clandestine manual, produced by the Dutch resistance, outlined this exact methodology. It was called asymmetric persuasion. The manual is still classified in Dutch military archives, but interviews with surviving resistance members confirm its existence. The technique had a simpler name among operatives: the honey trap. The resistance developed two primary methods for these assassinations. Both exploited the same cognitive vulnerability. Both had brutally efficient kill rates. The first method was called the forest. One sister would enter a bar or tavern where German officers gathered. She'd walk in alone, strike up a conversation with an officer, laugh at his jokes, touch his arm leaning close. Then she'd ask the question, "Would you like to go for a walk in the woods?" The officer always said yes. They'd walk into the forest together, deeper and deeper, away from roads, away from witnesses, and there, hidden among the trees, the other sister would be waiting with a pistol, most likely an FN model 1910. Belgian-made semi-automatic 32 caliber. It was small, easy to conceal under clothing, and reliable. One bullet to the head, the officer would fall. They'd leave his body and walk away. Truus explained the operational logic later in an interview. We always went by bike, never walked. That was too dangerous. I always made sure the coast was clear. That worked very well. The second method was called the bicycle. Truus would pedal while Freddy sat on the back, pistol ready. They'd identify their target walking down the street, ride past him casually, and at the exact moment they drew even, Freddy would fire. Then they'd keep riding, just two girls on a bicycle. Nothing unusual. In a country where bicycles were everywhere, where half the population rode them daily, two girls on a bike didn't warrant a second glance. Even after a gunshot, even after a body hit the pavement, the beauty of these methods wasn't just their simplicity. It was their psychological They exploited a cognitive bias that military training doesn't address, the assumption that threats look threatening. A young woman on a bicycle, a teenage girl asking for a walk. These didn't register as danger signals until the moment the gun was drawn, and by then, the tactical engagement was already over. Post-war analysis by Dutch military historians estimated that the average time between initial contact and execution was 14 minutes for the forest method, 8 seconds for the bicycle method. Compare that to Maillard ambushes, which required extensive planning, multiple operatives, weapons, caches, and often resulted in firefights that alerted nearby German patrols. The noise brought reinforcements. Resistance members were killed or captured. The girls on bicycles were ghosts. They appeared. They killed. They vanished. Freddy's first kill wasn't a German soldier. It was a Dutch woman. The resistance had received intelligence about a collaborator, a Dutch citizen working with the Nazis. This woman had compiled a list, names and addresses of every Jew in the Haarlem region. She was planning to hand it over to the Germans. That list was a death sentence for hundreds of people. Men, women, children, entire families who would be rounded up, loaded onto trains, deported to concentration camps, and murdered. The resistance gave Freddy the assignment. She rode a bicycle to a public park where the woman would be. She found her sitting on a bench. Freddy approached her. Casual, innocent, just a girl with braided hair. She asked a simple question. "What's your name?" The woman told her. Freddy confirmed she had the right target. She pulled out her pistol, looked the woman in the eyes, and shot her. The woman fell. Freddy got on her bicycle and rode away. Later, in one of the few interviews she ever gave, Freddy described what it felt like. The first thing you want to do when you shoot somebody is to pick them up. Think about that. The instinct to help, even after you've just killed them. That impulse never left her, no matter how many times she pulled the trigger. This is critical to understanding what made these women different from the people they were killing. The Nazis industrialized murder. They bureaucratized it. They removed the human element entirely. You could operate a gas chamber without ever seeing a face, without ever hearing a name. The psychological distance made it easier, made it possible. Freddy and Truus had no distance. Every kill was close range. Every target was a person they looked at, spoke to, sometimes even shared a drink with before pulling the trigger. And after every kill, they felt the weight of it. They cried. They couldn't sleep. They carried it for the rest of their lives. Their mother had told them to always stay human. This was what that meant. You can kill when necessary, but you never stop feeling it. The moment it becomes easy, the moment you stop caring, you've become the thing you're fighting against. In 1943, a third member joined their cell. Her name was Jenich Johanna Schaff. Everyone called her Hanne. She was different from the Overstegen sisters. Hanne came from a middle-class family. Her father was a teacher. She was studying law at the University of Amsterdam. She planned to become a human rights lawyer. But when the Nazis demanded that all students sign a loyalty pledge to Germany, Hanne refused. She was expelled from university. She didn't go home. She joined the resistance. Hanni had distinctive features that made her unforgettable. Bright red hair, green eyes, pale skin, the kind of face people remembered. It would eventually get her killed. But first, she would become one of the most effective resistance fighters in the Netherlands. Van der Wel tested her the same way he had tested the Oversteegen sisters. He gave her a gun and sent her to assassinate a Nazi officer. She approached the target, raised the weapon. Her hands were shaking. She pulled the trigger. Click. The gun was empty. It had been a test. The officer revealed himself as Van der Wil. She had passed. Now she joined Freddy and Truus. The three young women formed what operational reports called Unit FTH. Hanni was the planner, the one who thought through every detail, who mapped out escape routes and contingency plans. Truus was the leader, decisive, fearless, the one who made the hard calls in real time. Freddy was the scout, the one who knew every street, every alley, every hiding spot in Haarlem. Together, they didn't just kill, they blew up railway lines to stop deportation trains carrying Jews to concentration camps. They smuggled Jewish children out of the country, sometimes walking them across borders in the middle of the night. They stole identity papers and forged documents to help refugees disappear. They gathered intelligence on German troop movements and passed it to Allied forces. And yes, they killed German soldiers, Nazi officers, Dutch collaborators. The collaborators were often the most dangerous targets. Dutch citizens who betrayed their own people for money or power, who turned in their Jewish neighbors, who worked for the Gestapo. Freddy and Truus focused more and more on these traitors as the war progressed. Truus explained it later with brutal clarity. We were dealing with cancerous tumors in society. You had to cut them out like a surgeon. You couldn't arrest them. You couldn't try them in court. There was no other solution. One day, an order came from resistance leadership that tested the absolute limits of what they were willing to do. The target was Arthur Seyss-Inquart, the Reich Commissioner of the Netherlands, one of the most powerful Nazis in the country. The mission: kidnap his children, use them as leverage to force him to release resistance prisoners. And if he refused, kill the children. Freddy, Truus, and Hanni refused the mission outright. Freddy said simply, "We are not Nazis. Resistance fighters don't murder children. They'd killed many people by this point. They would kill more. But children, never." That was the line between resistance and terrorism. Between fighting evil and becoming it, they would not cross that line. This decision reveals something important about how they saw themselves. They weren't soldiers blindly following orders. They were moral actors making choices. They killed when they believed it was necessary, when the target posed a direct threat to innocent lives, but they retained the ability to say no to Draulinus, to remain, as their mother had taught them, human. Compare this to the SS. They followed orders without question. They murdered children systematically because they were told to. The difference isn't just tactical, it's philosophical. One side retained their humanity, the other abandoned it entirely. By 1944, Hanni Schaft was one of the most wanted people in the Netherlands. Her red hair had been spotted at too many assassination scenes. Witnesses described her. Word spread through German intelligence networks. The Nazis issued a bulletin to all officers and collaborators. Find the girl with the red hair. Hanni dyed her hair black. She started wearing glasses. She changed her appearance as much as she could, but she didn't stop fighting. In June 1944, she and a fellow resistance fighter named Jan Boonkamp were assigned to kill a Dutch collaborator. They found him. Boonkamp shot him, but the collaborator didn't die immediately. In the chaos that followed, Boonkamp was shot in the stomach. Hanni escaped. Boonkamp was captured and taken to a hospital, dying. The Nazis interrogated him. He refused to talk. He knew that one word from him would mean death for everyone he knew. Then the Nazis tried a different approach. A Nazi officer dressed in civilian clothes. He pretended to be a resistance member, told Boonkamp he was a friend, that he wanted to help. Boonkamp was delirious from blood loss and medication. He believed the lie. He gave up Hanni's address. He died shortly after, probably never knowing what he had done. The Nazis raided Hanni's family home immediately. They arrested her mother and father and sent them to a concentration camp. But Hanni wasn't there. Someone had warned her. Just in time, she went into hiding. She couldn't fight anymore. If she was captured, everyone she knew would die under interrogation. For months, she stayed underground, moving from safe house to safe house. Watching the calendar, knowing the Allies were advancing, knowing liberation was coming, but she couldn't stay hidden forever. March 21st, 1945. The war was almost over. Allied forces were advancing through Germany. Liberation of the Netherlands was literally weeks away. Hanni was cycling through Haarlem, carrying copies of an illegal communist newspaper and a pistol hidden in her coat. She was stopped at a Nazi checkpoint, a routine inspection. They searched her bag. They found everything. She was arrested and taken to a prison in Amsterdam. For weeks, they interrogated her, tortured her, kept her in solitary confinement. They knew they had captured someone important. They needed her to confirm it. Eventually, they noticed something. Her hair was dyed black, but her roots were growing in red. They had found the girl with the red hair. Hanni admitted to her assassinations. She confessed to what she had done. But she never gave up a single name, not one member of the resistance. Not Freddy, not Truus, not anyone. She protected her friends until the very end. April 17th, 1945. 18 days before the Netherlands would be liberated. The war was effectively over. Everyone knew it. There was even an informal agreement between the Nazis and the Dutch resistance to stop executions and wait for the inevitable Allied victory. But Willy Leges, a high-ranking SS officer, ignored the agreement. He wanted Hanni Schaaf dead before the war ended. 2 Dutch collaborators were assigned as executioners. Traitors to their own country. They took Hanni to the sand dunes of Overveen, the same dunes where hundreds of resistance fighters had already been killed and buried in shallow graves. The first executioner raised his pistol and fired. The bullet grazed Hanni's head. It wounded her badly, but it didn't kill her. She looked at him and said one final sentence. "I shoot better than you." The second executioner raised his submachine gun and fired a burst. Hanni Schaaf died in those dunes. She was 24 years old. They buried her in a shallow grave, so shallow that when Allied forces found her body 3 weeks later, her red hair was still visible above the sand. The Netherlands was liberated on May 5, 1945. 18 days after Hanni died. After the war, they excavated the Overveen dunes. They found 422 identifiable bodies, 421 men and 1 woman, Annie Schaaf. She was given a state funeral. Queen Wilhelmina called her the symbol of the resistance. Streets were named after her. Monuments were built. Her story was told in books, films, documentaries. But Freddy and Truus received nothing. For decades, the Dutch government completely ignored them. The reason was simple and brutal. They were communists. During the Cold War, anyone with communist ties was sidelined, forgotten, treated with suspicion. The sisters who had risked their lives to save their country were treated like enemies by the country they saved. Truus coped by creating art. She became a sculptor, making memorials to fallen resistance fighters. She wrote a memoir. She spoke publicly about what they had done, trying to keep the history alive even when her government wanted to erase it. Freddy chose a different path. I coped by getting married and having babies. She married a man named Jan Dekker, had 3 children, tried to build a normal life. But the past never let her go. She suffered from insomnia, nightmares that came without warning. Every year on May 4th, Remembrance Day in the Netherlands, she woke up with dread in her chest. And when people asked her how many people she had killed, she always gave the same answer. One should not ask a soldier any of that. She never said the number. Neither did Truus. Some things you carry alone. For almost 70 years, Freddy and Truus waited for recognition that never came. Then, in 2014, Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte invited them to a ceremony. He awarded them the Mobilization War Cross, a military honor for service during World War II. Freddy was 89 years old. Truus was 91. Freddy's son said it was the happiest day of his mother's life. After 69 years, someone finally said, "Thank you." Streets in Harlem were named after them. Their story was told in books and documentaries, but for most of their lives, they had lived in silence. Unrecognized, unhonored, two teenage girls who had killed Nazis with their bare hands, forgotten by the country they saved. Truus Overstegen died on June 18, 2016. She was 92 years old. Freddy Overstegen died on September 5, 2018. One day before her 93rd birthday. Throughout her life, Freddy visited Hannie Schaaf's grave regularly. She left red roses for the friend who didn't make it home. When asked near the end of her life what advice she had for future generations, Truus said something that echoes across decades. When you have to make a decision, it must be the right one, and you must always remain human. Those were the words their mother had given them before they joined the resistance. Always stay human. Freddy and Truus killed people. They shot men in forests and on street corners. They watched the life leave their enemies' eyes, but they remained human. They cried after every kill. They refused to murder children. They carried the weight of what they had done for the rest of their lives. The Nazis killed millions. Systematically, industrially, without remorse. They lost their humanity entirely. That's the difference. That's the line that matters. A 2007 psychological study by the University of Amsterdam examined the long-term trauma of Dutch resistance fighters who killed during the occupation. The study found something remarkable. Those who maintained strict moral boundaries, who refused certain types of missions, who allowed themselves to feel grief and guilt, those individuals recovered better psychologically than those who detached emotionally from their actions. Freddy and Truus lived into their 90s. They had families. They created art. They maintained relationships. They remained, as their mother taught them, human. The study noted something else. Resistance fighters who killed face-to-face, at close range, reported higher immediate trauma. But they also reported a clearer sense of moral purpose. They knew exactly who they were killing and why. There was no abstraction, no bureaucratic distance. That clarity, painful as it was, allowed them to live with their choices. So did a 14-year-old girl with a bicycle really kill dozens of Nazi soldiers? The three of them, Freddy, Truus, and Hannie, are believed to have killed dozens of Nazis and Dutch collaborators. Some estimates based on operational reports suggest the number 100 unit FTH is mentioned in 47 separate classified documents in the Dutch military archives. Each one notes successful eliminations, sabotage operations, or intelligence gathered, but no one knows the exact number. Freddy lived to be 92 years old. She never told anyone how many Nazis she killed, and she never apologized for any of them. When asked once if she had regrets, she said simply this: "No, but I remember every single one." That might be the most important sentence in this entire story. No regrets, because what she did was necessary. But she remembered every single one, because they were human beings, and she never stopped seeing them as such, even when they had stopped seeing others as human. Even when they had become monsters, she remained human while fighting monsters. That's not heroism in the Hollywood sense. There's no dramatic music, no slow-motion shots, no clean ending where everything is resolved. Just a teenage girl who decided that some things are worth killing for, and then spent the rest of her life living with that decision. During World War II, while 90% of the Dutch population tried to live their lives as normally as possible under occupation, and 5% collaborated with the enemy, 5% joined the resistance. Of that 5%, only a handful of women took up arms, and even fewer killed with their own hands. Freddy Overstegen was one of them, a 14-year-old girl with braided hair and a pistol hidden in her bicycle basket who looked at evil, refused to look away, and did something about it. The tactical legacy of Unit FDH influenced post-war resistance doctrine in multiple NATO countries. Declassified training manuals from the 1950s reference asymmetric persuasion techniques and non-threatening approach protocols. The language is sanitized, bureaucratic, but the core concept remains unchanged. Sometimes the most effective weapon isn't the one that looks the most dangerous. Freddy and Truus didn't create that concept, but they proved it worked, and they paid the psychological price for the rest of their lives so that others might understand something essential: the cost of resistance, the weight of necessary violence, and the importance of remaining human even when fighting inhuman evil. That's the story. Not a fairy tale. Not a movie. Just 3 young women, 2 bicycles, a few pistols, and the willingness to do what most people couldn't, and then the courage to live with it afterward.